Hello folks, Lindsay Setchell here again, and welcome to an It's Not Rocket Science lesson. It's been a while. We haven't done one of these for a while, and you'll notice I'm not stood next to my whiteboard with my markers. So it's not quite the same, but I am going to be giving you a lesson. And in this lesson, we're going to examine a cadaver limb that has been described as a classic sinker case. This is a foot where P3 is said to have sunk down within the hoof capsule. Now, this is a video that has been shared on another page by Dr. Simon Curtis. And this video, he said, you can quite happily share for educational purposes. And that's what I'm going to do. You'll see the sole, you'll see the x-ray, you'll see the inside of the foot because they did a sagittal section as well. And you'll see that the conclusion is that the laminae have failed and P3 has rotated, it's sunk, and it's penetrating, and this represents a terminal laminitis. This is when horses are put to sleep because they are not going to recover. Now, we know from our rehabs that that's not true, and we also know that the reason these horses are in this situation is not because of catastrophic laminae failure and P3, which is everybody's told that P3 is suspended in the capsule, that it's sunk, that it's rotated. Hopefully in this lesson, I'm going to show you that, because what we're actually going to look at here is something far more common. This is, and far more misunderstood. This is not P3 sinking. This is a hoof capsule that has been manipulated either side of what we would call the divergence line. Basically, the capsule has been taken off its true anatomical balance point. And when that happens, the foot is placed onto a different plane. At the heels, we have compaction, which begin to dominate, and it's not kept on top of. The heels are allowed to rise and underrun. And at the toe, the vertical depth is reduced. And the balance between that anterior and posterior aspects of the foot then are lost. And this is how horses are put onto different planes. This is how divergence starts. This is how the tearing starts. And it's incredibly common in modern hoof care. And it is the reason why millions of dollars of research money has gone into laminitis, and they are no further forward, because the problem isn't inside the foot or inside the body. The problem is how that foot has been manipulated and how it's come off balance. And when that imbalance progresses, the usual explanation is it's laminitis, the laminae have failed, P3 is rotated, P3 is sank, P3 is penetrating, the SADP, the suspensory apparatus of the distal phalanx, have failed, the laminae attachment have failed, everything has failed inside, and P3 is whistling around inside the capsule. So for those of you who follow us, you know that that is actually an impossibility. It's an anatomical impossibility, because it's not actually what happens at all. What happens is long-term mechanical manipulation of that hoof capsule. Those internal structures are forced into altered relationships with the capsule, with the sole, because of the way it's been trimmed, whether it's shod or not, and managed onto the wrong plane, trimmed onto the wrong plane. But you see, without sequential x-rays, without historical photographs, without understanding how that divergence got there in the first place, how it developed over time, it's very, very easy to look at a cadaver foot like this, at one static image, at one static x-ray, especially post-mortem, and assume catastrophic laminar failure, especially when this has come out of no history whatsoever. But when you rehab enough horses like this, you pretty much know what the history was. This wasn't a history of a horse that went out and ate too much grass, got super fat, got EMS, and ended up just sinking through his feet. This is a lesson about how divergence happens and how the world has missed it. And they continue to miss it. And even though we are extremely successful at our rehabs, without using any interventions, without cutting the DDFT and tenotomies, and without doing resections, without clogs, without wedges, without venograms, without heart bar shoes, etc., we do this by putting the foot back into balance, stopping the divergence, allowing P3 and the hoof capsule to remain, to become in balance with each other again, and then the old damage grows out. And as long as you keep it like that, that's how horses rehab. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you why the assumptions that are made in the world of the belief system, where it's the lamini failing and P3 rotating and sinking, etc. We're going to talk about planes. We're going to talk about divergence. We're going to talk about compaction at the heels. We're going to look at why the idea of sinking persists and when the evidence tells a different story. And this isn't about argument. It's about understanding anatomical balance and how easily it can be lost. So shall we get into it? Okay, let's do it. So let's get our imaging up on the screen. Okay, so Simon Curtis is a farrier in the UK. He's considered a master farrier, and he goes around the world doing talks, conferences, and teaching people. Perhaps Dr. Simon Curtis is not of the era of Canva, where you are able to take x-rays and you are able to overlap them, overlay them, and you're able to look at them. Now, what you're going to see in a moment is that Mother Nature was far from random, and Mother Nature was obsessed with scale. When you scale up and down, you start to see patterns. So let's have a quick look. He's called this Sinkers Are Killers. This video was made at the Hunt Country Vet Clinic, where I was giving a workshop to the North Carolina Jam session. If you like it, then you're welcome to share it. It's important knowledge. It certainly is important, and that's why we're going to look at it. So in this very first image here, he is saying that there's an indentation at the hairline and the aligned HPA. So that's just telling you immediately how this particular farrier and how many farriers around the world believe that trimming to an HPA is going to therefore give you a P3 which is nicely balanced inside. Well, that's not true, because this hoof wall here is growing from where the papillae are, and the papillae are stuck in their sockets, and they basically go where the hoof capsule goes. You can create a false HPA on a horse that's super high heeled. You can also have an HPA that is natural on a horse that grows out issues and is rehabbing. And that's one of the things that we look at when we're doing the rehabbing, is watching that new growth come down. So the HPA, first and foremost, is absolutely not a constant, and it is not something that you should be trying to follow, because if you do that, you are in super danger of foxing yourself to believe that P3 should be in a normal position inside. So that's number one. He also talks about an indentation here, and if I play this, if I play the video, you can see that he's now pointing to the hoof capsule wall, and he's pointing to that area just at the top of this hoof capsule, which he says when you press in there, you get a dent, and that tells you the horse has been sinking or rotating. Well, what's actually happening there is that the hoof capsule itself and the hoof wall are not in alignment with the anatomical, the bones inside, the anatomy inside, and therefore P3 is not in the right position, and you will feel a slight dent in that position because P3 is not where it should be in relation to that hoof wall, because it's been kept in a hyperpositive position. So that's a very poor diagnosis of what's been going on, apart from the fact that if you do feel that, you should work out that you have gone completely off balance. There's also a sort of gap where you see his finger, and that's because this horse had been abscessing. He'd abscessed right up the very front of his dorsal wall, and you'll see that on the x-ray. And another thing to note also on this, just as before we move on, is that the fact this horse hasn't got enough dorsal wall seems to have completely missed Dr. Simon Curtis and the people that were perhaps in that workshop. We teach our students to understand the relationship between heel and dorsal wall. And as I said earlier, Mother Nature isn't random. She does everything on scale. And therefore, you can look at a foot, a hoof capsule, and you can start to see patterns and relationships in that hoof capsule. And one of those is the dorsal wall from the point of the coronary band down and the heel height from the point of the coronary band down. And that fits very nice and neatly into specific ratios. And this foot does not fit into that at all. So immediately when you look at this hoof capsule, you should be able to, as our students can, see whether this horse has lost vertical toe depth, which it has, and whether it's increased heel depth, which it has. Okay, so let's carry on. Let's carry on playing this. Now we get to underneath the foot, and he's pointing here to, without a doubt, P3 showing its face. Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. You have not got that wrong. Absolutely, P3 is penetrating through this sole. But the belief is that it came down, it sunk, it pushed this very hard sole into a lump, and it created this, what you will see is an illusion of what actually is going on with this foot. So there are a few things I want to point out, and I'm sorry it's a bit blurred, but it's because it's been taken off a video. So as we are looking at the bottom of this hoof capsule, we can assess a few things. First of all, we can assess that over time, this horse has been allowed to grow very long bars. You can see here this line here. I hope you can see my arrow. Yes, you can, which shows you that these bars have been overgrown and overlaid. In fact, so much so you cannot even see the true end of the bar. What we've got here is compacted bar material, excess compacted bar material that runs all the way around the apex of the frog, which is adding to the problem. You can see the depth here at the apex of the frog. You can see this wavy line. You shouldn't be able to see all of those things if those bars have been trimmed correctly. So that automatically tells me that the person that was trimming this foot, whether they were the person that got them into the state in the first place or not, has not understood the fundamentals of what you should and shouldn't be trimming on the bottom of a foot. Secondly, if you leave these bars to overgrow like this, you cannot find the true seat of corn. That means that you can't find the true hard sole plane in there because it's overlaid over that area there. And also the other point is that down here is the widest part of the frog and also the periople. And those are also constants because those indicate to you how far those heels have gone from a normal anatomical constant balance. So that's a bit of an issue as well. Now, one of the things that I was talking to you about before was divergence, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more now in a little bit brief, but you'll get the idea. So if you take a line and you put it across roughly the widest part of the horse's foot, and it's around about a centimeter back from the apex of the frog, either side of this line, which is what we call the divergence line, you are going to get issues with balance if you do not keep the capsule balanced, the sole balanced to its P3 inside. Hoof capsules are like a glove. They're like a Russian doll. They are there to fit like a glove. They're there not to be manipulated off balance. Now, the beauty about the hard sole plane is it's always there, but it can get hidden. So what happens is at the back of the foot, it is allowed to compact. And this is the compaction in the back of the foot that's being allowed to rise, if you like, compact. So the true hard sole plane's in there, but it's hidden underneath that compaction. So unless you know where that is, you're going to end up getting infection sites because you're allowing bars to fold over, you're getting pressure points, and you're getting heels that are far too high. In the front of the capsule, this has been removed too much. So it doesn't appear like it has because you can't see the classic dumping of the toe. But underneath this sole here, you can start to see that there is actually separation there. It's hidden because that sole has migrated over the lamellar wedge, but given time with appropriate trimming and rebalancing, you'd start to see that lamellar wedge begin to develop. So you can see a couple of things. P3 is hidden back here. It's not just quite here. It's hidden just back here underneath this, what looks like a flap of hard sole, right in front of the apex of the frog. And that's where you'll find P3 always. It never, ever changes with its relationship to the apex of the frog. That is an anatomical constant. And that is because both the frog and the sole grow from the dermis, which is attached to the bottom of P3 and is also contiguous with the dermis and the papillae for making frog horn. We're not going to talk about that in this lesson, but just to know that that's an anatomical constant, which means that P3 can't just go rotating in the hoof capsule because both are attached. So if it rotates, either this frog has got to whistle backwards in the capsule when it's already attached to this super hard sole, contiguous because it's the integumentary system, it's the skin system, which means there are no holes in that system. Everything is attached. And so therefore, if P3 is going to rotate, it has to take all of this with it. Well, we see that that doesn't actually happen. What happens is the back of the foot rises and this part of the foot is removed. This kind of removal foxes people because they don't see that classic dumping. They don't see that classic lamellar wedge. But I can assure you that that's there, and you don't have to dump the toe wall. You don't have to remove it completely up the dorsal face of the hoof capsule in order for you to remove foot. And on Dr. Simon Curtis's post, it was mentioned that the front of the foot had been removed, and his response to that was there were no signs of that. Well, the signs are there. Just because that's not been dumped doesn't mean to say that this hoof capsule has not been reduced. You can take a cadaver foot and you can just keep taking down that toe, blending it in with a higher heel. You can keep doing that, changing the plane of that horse's foot, and you don't even see that you've gone and removed that amount of material. And that's what's been going on here. Okay, so let's move on. Let's just move that divergence line and let's carry on. Okay, so he's given us a good view of the sole of the foot. And now what we're going to see is we're going to see the x-ray. Now I'm going to talk about this x-ray with you in a moment, but again, he talks about how the hairline and the HPA are aligning. Well, this is not, like I said before, this is a false indication that things are going okay inside the foot, inside the hoof capsule. That's not a good indication whatsoever. You need to be looking at other anatomical constants, and you need to understand the ratios of vertical depth of the toe to vertical heel. So if we carry on, we're just going to very quickly carry on. We're going to look at this x-ray. He then shows you the hoof capsule itself. You can see that this digital cushion is not particularly well developed, and look how high that digital cushion is, which indicates that the heels are not where they should be. And they're here at the front, so we've got too much at the back of the foot. It's not excessively, but again, this is only one moment in time, so you have to remember we didn't see the x-rays or the foot before it got to this state. So therefore the assumption is made that P3 just sank down through the capsule. But we can see in balance terms that the back of the foot has too much and the front of the foot has not enough. Yes, we've got separation, but that is the consequence of divergence. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of his video. So let's go over to what I have got set up for you here. So this is the x-ray of the same x-ray of this cadaver foot that Simon Curtis was working on. And you can see here that these red lines I've put in, this is the coronary band, and these red lines are where that horse's foot should have been before it was manipulated. And you can see that it's lost a tremendous amount of foot at the front, and it's got too much heel at the back. Now, this is a very weird x-ray because it's not actually, and it's been manipulated somewhat because we don't see the full board. And we're also not seeing the foot sat on the full board. It actually is fairly irrelevant, but it looks a bit strange. It looks like it's been manipulated a little bit. So we've got too much material here. It doesn't have to be a super amount because it's all about that balance across that divergence line. This likely has had far too much heel in the past. And during that process, they've gone off the balance point and they've just been balancing forward on the wrong plane and removing too much toe. That gives the impression that P3 has sunk. It hasn't sunk. This is the point of the coronary band, which is an anatomical constant. And you can see here that you have got the coronary groove and the shoulder of the coronary groove. Yes, it's distorted because this foot has been going through super distortion because it's being kept in a position that's causing stretch of the laminae for quite a long period of time, with the person chasing that HPA thinking that they have a balanced hoof capsule inside. We have established that this horse has not got enough hoof at the front. So it gives the illusion that this foot has been sinking through the capsule. It's not gone anywhere. Everything is still where it needs to be. At the back of the foot here, you've got lateral cartilages attached to P3 here. And those lateral cartilages attached to the palmar processes, they also attach to the coronary band. And then you can feel them and palpate them just above the coronary band. So they're in 3 anatomical areas, and they also have their own laminae and create their own area of hoof wall. So this P3 is stuck by an anatomical constants. You've also got an extensor tendon here, and that extensor tendon is also attached to parts of the coronary band. These are not what you might term free-flowing tendons. They do have attachment sites to other parts of anatomy. And therefore, what happens to these, the extensor tendon, which isn't talked about a great deal, is that this becomes super strained and inflamed and incredibly painful. Meanwhile, the DDFT, which is out the back, which everybody thinks is pulling, has very little tension on it whatsoever because it's now being squashed up at the back. Okay, so let's move on. How do we know that this is what is going on, other than the fact that it's clear we have not got enough dorsal wall covering the face of this P3? It's separated. P3 cannot rotate away from the dorsal wall independently. As soon as you work that out, you will then see that this is kept in a torque and tension and is causing this to strain because the hoof wall and the papillae are orientating the hoof capsule this way, and that's what causes the stretch. But the most important thing is it is unable to move. And here we have the frog, and that frog has not just suddenly swooshed back in the sole. It can't move. The P3 and the frog don't move together independently of the capsule because the sole and the frog are part of the capsule. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take one of our rehabs, and this is a horse called Hector. And I've already lined this up. So the beauty about Mother Nature is she likes to do things on scale. So if I just, if I just blow that up a little bit, and I'm just going to remove the coronary band, and I'm going to just fade between the two, and we're going to line those up. Mother Nature, like I told you, loves scale. Hector was also about to penetrate, as you can see here. Now I've lined it up to the P3 on the x-ray, so this isn't actually lined up on the ground. So the horse in the x-ray is actually a little bit more rotated than Hector was. He was about to penetrate through his sole too. So if I just fade between the two, if I stop around about there, that you can already see that the previous x-ray, which is P3 pretty much exposed, and it's just about to be exposed with Hector. But you can see here that there is still more material for Hector down here. You can also see that Hector here has a similar amount that needs to be rebalanced at the heels. If I do that, you can see. What needs to be done in these cases is that the foot needs to be rebalanced. That then immediately puts P3 into a better position. And therefore, then you take the divergence and the strain out of the capsule, and the new capsule grows in and the old capsule grows down. But you need to allow vertical depth to grow, because at this moment in time, this foot doesn't have enough foot because it's been taken away. This foot has also not enough, which you're going to see in a moment, but it has more than the previous x-ray. Okay, so let's take that away from there. And if we go along here, these x-rays here show part of Hector's rehab. So this was his x-ray when he turned up at Gorsworth Track livery. This is his x-ray just after the trim, when the heels were rebalanced and P3 was put back into a better position. Now you can see the hoof wall is now in a different direction. So that HPA still looks kind of good here, but in a minute, you're going to find that that is going to grow out, that hoof capsule, and then it's going to look something like this. And this is a natural HPA. This is not something that is forced. That is the HPA that a horse will create when it grows out its divergence. Now, it's super tricky with these horses to keep P3 where we'd like it to be, which is a little bit more, with a palmar angle a little less than this. And soon after this x-ray was taken, we adjusted that and brought this heel down a little bit more. And you can see that the epidermal and dermal laminae are now starting to correct themselves. We still have a wedge here to grow out, so it's going to take some time. We're about a third of the way through. The reason that people freak out about this long toe is because they think horses are going to trip. They think it's going to cause more tearing. I can tell you at this stage now, and there's a video just today or yesterday that Bethan put up on Cosworth of him walking along. You can see he's not tripping. He's totally comfortable, because he's concerned about is the back here, the back of the foot. This part here is not causing separation or tearing. The reason we leave this is because we're trying to gain vertical depth. Now, if you look when we took the shoe off and when we did this first realignment, remember this is on the same day, you can see that there's not this bit here under here, but you can see that there's a little bit, only a tiny bit of sole depth. So Hector was perilously close to penetrating his sole, just like this horse here. But this horse has penetrated, not because it's sunk down, but because all of that front of the foot was being removed until eventually it became so thin it just peeled itself open and exposed P3 below it, which is what would have happened to Hector had he carried on. Now you see this line here, that was the plane that Hector was stood on. That was his heel and that was the plane. So he was stood on that plane before. Where have you seen that before? You've seen it here. Sorry if that's making you feel a bit dizzy. That's the plane Hector was stood on. And here it is, right here. But what we did is we removed that section of the heel, rebalanced the foot, but then he's going to have to be supported in boots and pads because this needs to grow. So this was in August 2025. So this is a very current rehab for us. And this now is in February 2026. Now, the people that don't understand what we're trying to do here will scoff and think this is a long toe and how ridiculous. But you can see that HPA that Dr. Simon Curtis was coveting there earlier, which was a false HPA, he's now growing in a natural HPA, and he's growing depth underneath P3. Sufficient now that this horse is sound, out of boots, marching around his track. And another thing to just mention about Hector is when he turned up, he was on a huge amount of ertigrofloxacin because the vets were treating him as if he had laminitis, laminae failure. The laminae were separating because P3 was rotating independently in the capsule. And so they were trying to fix this with metabolic drugs. But of course, they didn't cause the heels to rise and they didn't chop his toe off. And again, it doesn't look like it's super dumped, but it was fairly dumped. But what's happening here is he's on the wrong plane and he's removing too much underneath P3 in front of that line that I showed you earlier. Right, what we're going to do now is we're going to take this one and we're going to put this onto this capsule. All right, let's just fade. Let's just make sure that we've got this lined up. Okay, now the interesting thing is here that this foot is balanced. It's balanced here. Our x-ray, he's balanced. We have brought down the heels, which obviously alters the plane, but he's not got enough here underneath P3. But if I was to take this and I was to put it in the same alignment, as I said, Mother Nature is absolutely scale mad. She loves scaling. She absolutely loves it. You can scale quite easily between horses of similar sizes. Now, I've just put that in line with there. Now, just take a look at where this red line is here. Can you see? Which is where pretty much the true sole is. And so you can see how far out this horse's foot was from its natural plane. Its plane was here. P3, which is attached to its natural hard sole plane, was being compacted at the back and having material removed at the front. Now, for those people who absolutely would die on the hill of laminitis causes separation, and the laminitis was caused from standing on one limb or endocrinopathic or sepsis, and they say that no, it happened overnight, P3 sank overnight, there are no x-rays that exist in the world that show that happening. There are no peer-reviewed papers that have shown that happening. There are no peer-reviewed papers that show lever forces are tearing laminae. There are no peer-reviewed papers that show cutting the DDFT tendon suddenly removes all of this mass underneath here and puts P3 back into the right position. But because if your head is in the space of P3 rotates independently, you can make up any narrative you like until you start having sequential x-rays. And that is the crux of the problem that the world, the equine world, has failed in. It's flawed because they've never been able to monitor the history of how horses get into this state, or conversely, how we get them out of this state. And so unless you do that, you're never, ever, ever going to be able to understand what is going on with these capsules. And you'll chase it with ertigliflozin and various other metabolic drugs. You'll box rest. The horse will get more and more crippled. You'll put them in heart bar shoes. You'll put them in wedges. You'll put them in clogs. And the horses just get more and more damaged. Now, some recover from this, but it's only because the foot has been rebalanced. And for those that have been rebalanced and they're still in shoes, then the problem has never been corrected, because a horse that is in shoes is sore because they're going through divergence, as well as potentially sole thinning, as well as leaving the bars and causing pressure points. Okay, so take this, and bring that back up, and let's just rotate him down, and then, let's just make that a little bit bigger. Now, if we put the shoulder of the coronary groove in the right spot, so everything's in the right spot, and then I do this, you can see, even with Hector, who was just about to penetrate, but he hadn't quite, he has more material than this horse has had. Basically, this horse has had the front of its foot beyond that divergence line scalped, and the back of the foot has been left too much. However, that will have been going up and down, and the front will have been doing the same too, because nobody really knows, because nobody's had a history, because the owner never took photographs, and who knows whether we've got x-rays that show this. We have x-rays showing this happening in horses' feet, and it's ironic, because one moment you'll see that it's sinking, people will say that it's sinking, it isn't sinking, and then we grow sole and they go, oh, it's not sinking anymore, therefore sole has been removed. Okay, so let's take this x-ray and let's move it back over here, and let's take a look at this one, which is now in February 2026, which is where Hector is at this moment in time and where he is in terms of his sole depth. I've lined all this up so you can clearly see that even though we have this toe in the way, which is not causing any problems, by the way, we have now gained a super amount of depth here, which is what Hector needed to become sound again. By allowing this toe to grow, that is the whole purpose of it. You are gaining on your vertical depth. If you remove that constantly, you are in danger of going straight back to what you have here. You have no balance point. You've got nothing you can balance to. And yet here you are with a horse that's completely sound. Now, it looks like he's got too much here, but that's because these two P3s are not lined up. Let's line them up back to where they were. Now you can see, now if I do this, you can see how much heel we took away. There you go, which is just above that red line. Again, we can take, there's a little bit of adjustment that needs to be done here, which is why we take regular x-rays, because when you're rehabbing these feet and you haven't got your perfect balance point at the toe, you need to be able to see how these feet are moving along. Well, you don't need to have to necessarily do it, but it's good practice to do so. Plus, this is our research, And this is what we're showing you. You can see now how the x-ray of the cadaver foot has too much heel, and you can see how it didn't have enough here to cover P3. I mean, it's there plain for everybody to see. And you can also see here that Hector is growing his line in, just following this line here. He's growing in his hoof wall, nicely connected to a natural HPA. Okay, so finally, I want to put on here a natural foot that she's naturally balanced. This horse was just about to leave the block, which is why he was starting to go forward. It's not a broken back foot. This horse was completely and utterly sound with absolutely no separation. And this is where we're trying to get to, which is an ideal, to be honest, which is ground parallel. With a lot of these pathological feet, you can't always get to ground parallel immediately, and sometimes they don't quite get there anyway, because you've had osteonecrosis not only at the tip, but you've also had it in the palmar processes. This horse here has already undergone osteonecrosis, not the foot, the x-ray I've just put on, but the one that was the cadaver foot of in the clinic with Dr. Simon Curtis. Okay, let's just rotate this balanced foot. And remember, we're in scale. So let's rotate this balanced foot, and we will put it, oops, there we go. Let's get that properly rotated in line with that P3. And what you will find is, look at the red lines. This is a perfectly balanced foot. Now, obviously, you're going to have some errors when you take x-ray. So unless you've got a machine doing it that is a computer and analyzing this horse's foot constantly, then if you're relying on human beings, they're going to take it slightly high or slightly low or slightly to the side, a little bit too much, a little bit too oblique. But this is good enough. You can actually see where the problem for this horse was. It was a plane problem. It was a balance problem. It was a divergence problem. So there you go. And then when we put that back, let's put that back here, that when this foot is lovely and healed, P3 is back there with a good amount of sole beneath it. And that P3 has had all of this sole removed, and it's been on the wrong plane. Okay, finally, right, let's nip down here, and let's have a quick look at this. So this is the inside, this is the sagittal section. Now, what we can't see, because we can't see underneath, is we don't know underneath, we don't know whether this sagittal section was taken directly, because it's not easy, directly in the center of the foot, or whether it was slightly one side or another. But what we can see is that there's not enough hoof wall covering this P3. It has been removed. Here we have a completely normal balanced hoof. I'm not going to go through all the anatomy here and now, but what we're going to do is we're going to line this one up and we're going to rotate it. Here we go. And you can see how much heel is left here. And it doesn't look like a lot because we're looking at frog, actually. We're not looking at heel there. So you can't actually quite see the side because we're looking at the center, or close to the center of the horse's foot. So you're not actually looking at heels, but you can see how high the digital cushion is in relation to where it should be. And you can see how much material has been lost. And over time, that plane has changed, and that the hoof care professional has not understood that change, has not taken photographs, they've not understood ratios, they've not probably measured critically the caudal height of the foot, and therefore they have gone completely off balance. Okay, so there you go. There's this foot. Right, let's just move that over there for a moment. And you can see how, when you're looking at these feet, you can see how they are on two completely different planes. You look where the digital cushion is on this foot, and you look where the digital cushion is on this one here. This is a sagittal section 2. DDFT is in a normal position. In this horse here, it is not like that. And then when we look over here, we can see that if I take this down, this is the exact hoof capsule of this horse, and it had actually been shod, but it was very well balanced. And a very well balanced foot doesn't need to be shod, because a very well balanced foot has got enough sole, has got enough appropriate heel, has had, balance isn't just about that too. It's also about taking away all the pressure points in the bars, etc. as well. Okay, so that is why sinking is still thought of as a thing. It isn't a thing because when you start rehabbing these horses and you take sequential x-rays, you can actually see the process in reverse. This is without changing any diet. Hector was in a box. He was crippled. He was on high doses of metabolic drugs, ertigliflozin, and he was being trimmed on the wrong plane, and he was getting worse and worse as the divergence and the tearing continued. But he wasn't eating grass because he was on box rest until he came to Goresworth, when we realigned his foot in one trim, and then we allowed the old hoof capsule to grow out and restore vertical depth and stop the divergence happening ever again. And now he's totally sound, he's happy, and even though he's not all the way through his rehab yet, he's out of boots and he's doing super well. And isn't it sad that the horse that ended up in that clinic, in that workshop, as the thousands and thousands and thousands of cadaver hooves that we've gone through, and the same thing happens to the horses that end up in our workshops too. We can show our students how to rebalance a foot, and then you'll see the toe come off the ground. It's not sat on the ground anymore because you've rebalanced the back of the foot and the toe begins to float. And when you've done that the amount of times that we have, and you've watched that process happen, it's very frustrating when you still hear the narrative that P3 is sinking through the capsule. It's doing none of that. It's not suspended. It is, in fact, sat where it should be, inside the capsule, not moving at all. And it is the capsule that is taking it to different places, and it's going against its anatomical constants between the sole and the hoof wall. I hope you enjoyed that. It was a fairly long It's Not Rocket Science lesson. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.